Welcome to Front Office Pros, Joe. It's a happy new year to you and to everyone else watching the show, but it also means that the fantasy football season for 2023 has come to a close. We're flipping over the calendar to 2024, so we're going to be talking about players that you should be targeting in your Dynasty leagues in this offseason.
Hike!
Yeah, definitely Happy New Year, Steve, and everyone else out there. And unless people actually play out Week 18 in fantasy, most people, finished up their championships this past weekend. I happen to be champion in one league. Unfortunately, lost in another one, but I won in the league I had Christian McCaffrey, lost in the league I faced Christian McCaffrey in the championship, and that seemed to be the common denominator for most people, I'm sure. But going back to the trade targets here for the Dynasty. First player I'm going to mention is quarterback Matthew Stafford. Now, you're probably wondering, it's in a Dynasty league. Why in the world am I proposing to trade Matthew Stafford, guy who's 35, going to be 36 next year? But I think, if you're a win-now team looking to secure a quarterback and just want some consistency or even playing a, super flex league, I think Stafford's somebody that you can definitely add. People are, worried about his injury, how that could affect him this year. And honestly, it really hasn't affected him much, and he's played really well. He's got a young core around him. Obviously, Puka Nacua turned out to be a great draft pick. He's a huge weapon for him. Even Demarcus Robinson playing, and still has Cooper Kupp there as well. But you're talking about with one game left in the season to go here, he's at just under 4,000 yards passing. He's had 24 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. And, if your fantasy league dead end, he's currently the quarterback 15 in leagues. So obviously, super flex or you just want to sell at QB2, Matt Stafford's your guy. And on our trade value charts, he's pretty low. He's around the Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins, Baker Mayfield area. But you could even trade a guy like Derek Carr, Geno Smith, and Deshaun Watson. I'd probably rather have Matt Stafford than those three guys.
Yeah, that's crazy. According to the Draft Sharks trade value chart, that people would be willing to have those guys over Matthew Stafford. He was a guy, Joe, you and I talked about. We thought he should retire based on that brutal injury that he had, and one bad injury could be, career over. So, but he has really proved the doubters wrong, including you and me. The other thing I thought was interesting about Stafford is you could basically, in a super flex league or not, their trade value chart allows you to see both. You could basically trade him for like a mid-second round pick. I feel like that's worth it, especially if you're a contending team. He's the type of guy that you may rotate in as a starter. So, and especially in a super flex league, you'd be happy to have him, especially with the guys like Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp probably is going to be back. You got a lot of weapons there. Kyron Williams came out of nowhere this year. So I like the call.
Yeah, I was really worried about not only his injury, but, the offensive line. That really hasn't seemed to be concerned. And, just credit to Sean McVay and this offense. Everyone thought the Rams were just going to be a crapshoot this year, and they've been everything but, and now a dangerous team in the playoffs.
So my first trade target, and I'm going to get some flack on this one, Joe. It's going to be running back Najee Harris. Najee had a disappointing 2023 season, I'll admit. He finished as a running back 27, so right outside that RB2 area. He's a guy for me that's going to take a sizable bump down in my dynasty rankings. I had him way too high, primarily because I think for my own personal self, I highly value volume. And he's a guy who is one of the best as far as the amount of opportunities he gets. But you could just see, his lack of explosiveness. And you've been calling that out for a while, Joe. He's not the most explosive guy. You've seen his counterpart in Jalen Warren. He's become more and more involved in that offense because of how explosive he is compared to Najee. But back to Najee, he had his most productive game of the season against the Seahawks. He had 27 carries, 122 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He wasn't involved in the passing game. But the reason why I would trade for him is, to me, he's a solid RB2 that gives you volume. I don't think he's ever going to be a league winner for you. I think he probably will never be better than what he was his rookie season. But what I like about him is he gives you a consistent floor of opportunities. And honestly, you don't need a stud at every position. I think that's a mistake. I think you got to have some studs, obviously, to lead your, you got to lead your team, but you also need some guys who are just going to be consistent floor options. And just due to his volume, you're going to get that. And here's the thing: the team that probably drafted him, if they haven't traded him already, he was probably most likely, I would think, Joe, a top 5 dynasty pick at the time during his rookie draft. It was kind of between him and Travis Etienne. I think Najee people end up drafting Najee over Etienne in that, during that draft. But needless to say, when it comes down to that, they've been probably very disappointed with Najee Harris. He's only been kind of going down. So as a result, you might not have to give up too much to get him. And like you've talked about, Joe, I don't really know what his future holds after his, once he has next. I think they have to accept his 5th-year option this year. So it'll be really interesting to see if they do. I don't think they will, which means then he only has 1 year or 2 years left, regardless of what they decide. But anyways, when it comes down to it, I think I'd be willing to trade away the likes of Joe Mixon. We've talked about him in the past. He's going to be a free agent. I don't know if he'll go anywhere. Derrick Henry's also a free agent. He's very old. He's 29 years old. Tyjae Spears, I know people are really jumping on the bandwagon with him, but I just think that they'll bring another running back in Tennessee. He's not going to be the guy. He's more of a change of pace, explosive running back. Jaylen Warren, I think I personally would rather have. I understand Jaylen Warren's more explosive. I don't think Warren's a league winner, but he can win you some matchups depending on if he goes off. I'd rather have the consistent RB2 than the inconsistent game winner, if that makes sense. And then, DeAndre Swift, he's another free agent guy who's done very well in Philadelphia, but his future looks a little murky. Don't know what it has in store. I'd rather have the possibility of another 2 years of Najee in Pittsburgh. So that's who I'm going for, Joe.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that, you stick your guns, Steve. I mean, you've been a Najee guy. You've been sticking with him. Don't mind your rollout. And at the same time, I think that's you were right, though. I mean, you can't have studs at every position, and it's a common misconception that, like, just go nuts with all these ceiling guys. Like, you do have to have a mix. I mean, you need somebody that's going to get you that floor ceiling, especially, if you got, like, a Breece Hall on your team. He's your ceiling guy. He's got the opportunity to win you weeks, but for the weeks that he doesn't boom, you need somebody that's going to be a solid floor, and I think Najee could do that. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we know that Steelers aren't going to re-sign him whenever his contract is up. It'll be interesting if they do end up going with the 5th-year option, to your point. And that's where I think I would just rather have a little bit more of the potential longevity with Jaylen Warren at this point, and brings you that explosiveness. But I do understand what you got there, and with Najee, and for whatever reason, like, Najee just doesn't play well in the first half of the year, but then you get him in the second half of the year when things start to matter. All of a sudden, this guy turns it on. And I know I pick on him for his lack of efficiency, but, watching him play against the Seattle Seahawks, I mean, he was breaking tackles, and he was actually averaging like 5 yards a carry or close to it. And he was averaging at 5.6 at one point. I'm not sure if he finished that way or not, but when he breaks tackles, I mean, he has that ability to be a little more efficient, but I don't know what it is between the first half and the second half, but play him for the second half of the year, I guess.
Well, and it fits the identity of the team. They're a ground and pound, heavy defense team. I mean, they've got Mason Rudolph at quarterback. He's been doing a little bit better for them, versus what Pickett and, Trubisky did. But at the end of the day, they're not – it's not the Steelers of Ben Roethlisberger's days when he's throwing, 500 attempts, and to a ton of receivers. Just don't have the quarterback play to support that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they still had a guy like Big Ben out there, I mean, Jaylen Warren would be that much more valuable with how much he would just dump that off.
Absolutely. So are you enjoying this video so far? Well, if you are, show your support to our new channel by hitting the subscribe button and liking this video. We'll be creating videos all NFL season long, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store.
So my next player to bring up here to trade for is going to be running back Isaih Pacheco. And I know he's a Kansas City Chief player, but I just really enjoy watching this guy play. He just runs so hard. He's so physical. And next year, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's going to be gone. He's a free agent. And this opportunity for Pacheco to really be his backfield this coming up. I mean, I know there's potential to bring somebody else in, but I think the Chiefs just like this guy and like the physicality he brings, and he really is the heartbeat of that offense right now with the struggles and the lack of talent that they have on the field at the moment. But ever since November 5th, Pacheco's, involvement has increased. He's gotten double-digit carries in every single week since then. Also had 5 touchdowns over that 6-week span, and he's even increased his utilization from last year. Went from 170 attempts to 205 this year with another week to go, and then also picked up more in the receiving game as well. If you're playing in the PPR leagues, went for 13 receptions all the way up to 44 this year. So that's nice to see. And hopefully next year things will start, continue to increase. But he also, so far through 17 weeks, finished as the RB13 as well, which is pretty nice. Just outside, RB1 territory in a usual 12-person league. And some guys that I'd be willing to trade for him, honestly, Austin Eckler's old. Got Tony Pollard, who was disappointing. And I think I'd even, be willing to do a guy like Rachaad White, your ultimate volume play there, Steve. I just don't know. I don't know. It'd be interesting what Tampa does. Is Baker Mayfield back in that offense, and he really feeds into Rachaad White with how much he likes to just dump the ball and feed him those receptions.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with you on this one. I think when it comes to Pacheco, I think it's sort of a kind of being a prisoner of the moment. The Kansas City Chiefs offense as a whole is struggling mightily. And as a result, whether you read in the reports or not, whether Andy Reid is simplifying the play calls and, they're trying to make it more simple concepts and all this other stuff, you can see, at least I saw from watching the game, they are relying heavily on Pacheco because that's like the only thing that's working right now is really just making sure Pacheco gets a huge amount of the volume. And he has done really well with it. I just am going to think that for them, I don't think it's going to result in a winning formula for them. So I think that they're going to do a lot of changes this offseason, giving Patrick Mahomes more weapons, because I don't think they're going to say to themselves, the way we win is through using Pacheco. Like they're saying we don't have enough weapons to help Patrick Mahomes. So I think that right now Pacheco is like at an all-time high, but I just don't see that going forward. It's going to be like that. So I think you're going to be disappointed because I think he'll depreciate. I don't hate the guys you're saying you're going to trade. Eckler's a free agent this year. He might even retire, to be honest with you. I don't know who would want to acquire Eckler right now, just based on his situation. I would. Pollard, I've been, I don't like Pollard. I was off on him from the beginning. You knew that, and that it resulted that way. Rachaad White's an interesting one. I'd rather have White, but if he stays the starter, and he may not, like you said. So that's right. An interesting one. That's an interesting one because Pacheco will maintain the starter role. I don't know if they might bring another running back in. I don't know. But they probably will because McKinnon's a free agent. And so is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So they'll probably bring somebody else in as well to kind of be that 1B type of role. So, I just don't know if I believe in his future. So I don't know if I'd want – he's not a guy I would target right now.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I don't know. I just think Kansas City could also change their offense. I mean, who knows? Kelsey might retire, and that could also spark some different things. Kansas City offense hasn't been what we thought. Obviously, you mentioned the lack of talent. Rashee Rice is the only reliable weapon outside of Isiah Pacheco right now. Definitely think that will change. I mean, as they try to bring somebody in, I guess it'll depend on what other pieces they're able to bring in. But I still think he's potentially going to be a foundation piece of this offense just because they like to be a physical team. They have a pretty physical defense, and Pacheco just brings that physicality and gets them, nice yards on first downs and sets up the rest of their offense.
Mahomes has definitely had a rough season. There's no doubt about that. I think there's not enough talk, honestly. They talk about how the team is kind of in disarray, but they don't talk about how bad Mahomes has performed, as far as all the turnovers.
I think everyone's just giving him a pass because they see all the drops happening and just know that they have a lack of talent at wide receiver at this point. And I think they're giving him the ultimate pass. But, you're definitely not wrong. I feel like if it was somebody else and not Patrick Mahomes, they'd definitely be getting more ridiculed and more talked about.
So my next trade target is going to be wide receiver Jalin Hyatt, a former third-round pick out of the University of Tennessee. He ended up having a quiet rookie season this year. He finished as the wide receiver 97 in PPR with 38 targets, 22 receptions, 368 receiving yards with 0 touchdowns. For me, you've been able to see the speed on the field, and you can't teach speed, Joe. So for me, that already is something that kind of separates him from the rest. But, I believe in Brian Daboll to be able to develop this guy. I think they're going to continue to develop the route tree. That was his biggest knock coming into the draft, was he's just a fly guy. He can't run all the different routes on the route tree. I think the biggest question mark for him and his success going forward is who's going to be the quarterback for the New York Giants. Right now, the New York Giants are projected to have a top 5 pick, in this heavy quarterback class. So you've got the likes of, it's probably this draft class may have up to 5 quarterbacks I think drafted in the first round, possibly. You've got the Heisman winner with Jaden Daniels. You've got, Bo Nix out of Oregon. You got Caleb Williams, Drake May, JJ McCarthy. There's Michael Penix. There's a lot of different quarterbacks coming out that are going to be really, really interesting. And so as a result, Giants are going to have their pick at one of those guys. I don't think Daniel Jones is the answer. He was inherited by the Daboll regime. So I think they're going to try to get their own guy, him and Joe Shane. So as a result, I think Hyatt could really take that next step forward. And I think being that people have not seen it yet, and we live in a society and a culture that they want stuff instantaneously, give it to me now. And if I don't get it, then, that owner might be getting a little antsy. So to me, I try to trade for him. According to the Dynasty trade value chart over at Draft Sharks here, he's not even equivalent to a 4th-round pick. That's a drop in the bucket. Send a 4th-round pick to this guy. This guy's got great potential. I would gladly trade for him. And I'd also be willing to trade away the likes of wide receiver Elijah Moore, Rashid Shaheed, Jacoby Myers, and Romeo Doubs. All these guys are, supposedly higher than him. And I would much rather take the flyer, no pun intended, and go with Jalin Hyatt.
Yeah, I do think he's definitely worth a flyer. We've seen the talent. We've seen him get down the field just like he did in college, in his one trick. I don't necessarily think the lack of the route tree is, definitely potentially a negative. If you're really good at something and you have that speed, they're going to find a way to utilize it and get you the ball. And they really have. I've been impressed with him and when he's been given the opportunities, and he's even made the tough contested catches as well, which is something you like to see, especially from a rookie wide receiver. So I do think you're right. I think this is the right time to buy, kind of before you see what the Giants potentially do at quarterback and maybe his value goes up, because that is the one major question is, quarterback, who's going to be throwing him the ball. And obviously wide receivers are heavily reliant on that. So I'd do it now before that becomes a little more solidified and more interest comes around him and his price goes up.
He's a great rebuild flyer. For me, if I was an owner who had like Mike Williams, with all the, chaos that's going to come with the Chargers, he might not even be on the roster. He might be a cap casualty. I would try to trade Mike Williams, and you could probably get Jalin Hyatt plus, I would think, and that to me, that's a rebuild kind of. You don't think so?
You really think you could? I don't know. I'd be curious to see how people value Mike Williams. I guess maybe it's just me, and I've been out of this guy just because he can't stay healthy and he's just so unreliable, and that makes me not like him. But maybe there is other people that value him differently.
Yeah, that would be interesting. We got a poll there, what people have to say.
Yeah.
But those are our 4 trade targets heading into the Dynasty offseason for 2024. We're going to be here throughout the whole offseason and talk about the free agency, the draft, you name it. We're going to be doing videos weekly, so you're not going to want to miss that. We'll be back next week to talk about some lessons that we learned from the 2023 season and what we'll be taking with us to 2024. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.